I'd like to welcome all of you to our What to Expect During Your Stage 1 Audit webinar. My name is Joseph Krolikowski. I am the QMS Program Manager for Perry Johnson Registrars. Couple of notes for everyone today. All of our participants today are on mute, but we absolutely want to address your questions, so please utilize the question portion of the dashboard. We will address all questions at the end of the presentation. One of the more common questions that we get is whether or not the presentation will be available after we're finished. We do make our webinars available in two key ways. If you'd like to get your hands on the slides will be available for download on our website at www.pgr.com. That'll be shortly after we're finished. And if you'd like to rewatch this webinar with the voiceover, that is also available through our YouTube page. And we have a link for that, again, on the pgr.com website. We're going to cover today why certification is done in a two-stage fashion. We're going to kind of walk you through the lead up to the stage one. We'll talk about quotation and some of the things that happen prior to the stage one. We'll go over what the stage one audit is all about, kind of front to back, what it's like to go through a stage one. We're going to identify some of the key things that can prevent continuance to a stage two audit. What are some of the key things that you need to be clear on and ready for, and how you should respond to those items. And then a couple concluding remarks and your questions. Now, to begin with, why we do this in two stages? Well, the short version is we are required to do certification in two stages. And this requirement comes from ISO 17021, which you can think of that as kind of an ISO 9001 standard for certification bodies like PJR. Now, that standard includes a clause that reads as follows. The initial certification audit of a management system needs to be conducted in two stages, stage one and stage two. Now, the intent, the logic behind that approach is they want to make sure that only those companies that are really, truly ready for the certification assessment are going to be permitted to go through the full audit. The stage one is a very condensed, short assessment. And it looks at some very core critical areas. So if you don't do well on the stage one, I guess one benefit of that, if you want to call it that, a silver lining, is that at least you've not gone through the expense and time of a stage two, which is obviously a much longer and much more expensive endeavor. Now, obviously, before we can do a stage one for you, you do have to be a PJR contracted client. And what we do to bring a company on board to become one of our clients is we use a series of scope-specific applications called the F1s. And we have one of these for all of the different scopes that we certify. We have one for ISO 9001. We've got a separate F1 for environmental standards and so forth. Now, the F1 documents, when you first get them, they're very detailed, they're very complex, but it's complexity with a purpose. The more information that we can gather about you up front, the more competitive our quote can be the first time that we issue it to you. So we do try to get as much information as we can so that we can try to give you a quote that is both competitive and fair. Now, audit time, you may or may not be aware, is rooted in a document from the International Accreditation Forum. You can think of them as kind of the top dog in the world of certification. And they have a document entitled Mandatory Document, or MD5. And that document stipulates what is the minimum amount of audit time that can be spent, or that has to be spent rather, at an organization. And the primary factor for audit time is headcount. So if you have 50 employees, this is where your audit time is supposed to be. If you have 100, here's where that is, and so forth. Now, we are permitted to apply discounts on audit time, but only up to 30%. So, if you are shopping around for certification bodies and you get, say, 3 quotes from 3 different certification bodies, if you have one that is just wildly different in terms of having a much, much reduced amount of audit time, it's possible that whatever that certification body is doing is not in compliance with the IAF requirements, and consequently, it's possible that that certification body may not be accredited in the first place. So do be careful about that. Now, prior to the stage 1, once we've got you contracted, you'll be assigned to what we refer to as an audit program coordinator. You're probably going to refer to that person as your scheduler. And that person is going to be your primary point of contact. They are going to manage all the aspects of scheduling you, making sure that the auditor's travel is booked, and things of that nature. Now, they are required to assign an auditor that is qualified in your standard. And beyond that, they also have to be competent in your technical area. So if you are coming to us from an industry that is unique or obscure, it's possible that your assessor is not going to be someone from the neighborhood. We certainly try to match clients with local auditors. We know that travel expense is something that everyone would like to avoid if it can be helped. But we also want to make sure that we're giving you an assessor that is going to know a thing or two about your business. If you are a chemical company, you don't want an auditor who has spent their entire career auditing machine shops. You want someone who has even a minimum amount of familiarity with chemical products. Now, once you've got an auditor assigned to your account, the scheduler is going to send you what is called an attestation of readiness. We refer to this as the F-108 series of documents. Let's take a look at that a little bit more on the next slide. Okay. Now, the F-108 series of documents, this is going to read like a checklist. Do you have this? Do you have this? And you're required to go down the line and confirm, yes, we have these items that you're telling us we need for our stage 1 audit. So what are some of these items? Well, these are all the things that are going to be looked at within the stage 1 audit. So if you're wondering, what are we going to get assessed on during the stage 1? That F-108 is going to point the way for you. So we need to confirm that you've defined your scope, that you know what your processes are, that you know how you're going to measure your processes, that you have things in order with your internal audit and your management review, and that your documentation is in place. Now, that's going to vary a bit, of course, from standard to standard. And then we have a special document called the PJR Form F-191. Now, this is optional, but we do highly recommend that you go through this exercise. And let me show you what I mean by this item on the next slide here. Okay. PJR's F-191, we've had this for a long time. It's still, I think, a point of confusion for our clients. This document is intended to help you ensure that the processes you've established represent a fulfillment of all the clauses for whatever standard you are pursuing certification to. The idea is that you're going to document what your processes are and assign the clause numbers accordingly. And in so doing, you'll show that you've met all of those clauses by what you've put together. So let's take a look at an example of how this is put together. Okay, so let's say that this is your interaction of processes. You'll note in the lower left-hand corner here, we actually have 6 processes that we've identified for this particular company. So those 6 processes are going to be sales order entry, purchasing, production, shipping, quality, and support. So now we're going to take these 6 processes and kind of map them out on the F-191. Okay, so you'll note on the left-hand side, we have our 6 processes. And on the grid, as you can see, we've matched up these processes with the various clauses of ISO 9001. Now, there's a couple of things, obviously, that you can note here. First of all, support is identified as impacting everything. All of the clauses are partially implemented by this support activity. You'll note that some processes only impact on a couple of clauses. Purchasing, you can see, is only 7.5 and 8.4. And then, obviously, there are no processes that are identified as aligning with clause 8.3. Now, the obvious takeaway from that is that this organization does not design any of its products or services. This is a no design client. So quite a bit of helpful information here, and your auditor can use this to try to understand what parts of the standard are being met by which of the processes. Okay, so now it's audit day. You've done all the pre-work, you've contracted with PJR, you've picked a date, approved the auditor, and now it's go time. We do typically try to do our stage 1s either on site or remotely. Obviously, we're doing stage 1s virtually as well in the pandemic time. We do offer what we call an offsite stage 1 also. And the way that's done is you would email or file share your materials with the auditor, and they would review them in an offsite capacity. It would not be a synchronous review. Now that is obviously a savings in travel cost versus on-site. It does in most cases mean a little bit more total on-site audit time because we are still required to meet that on-site audit requirement from the IAF MD5. My anticipation is we're going to see a continuing great number of stage 1s going remotely or virtually after the pandemic is over. Before your auditor arrives for the audit, you should expect to be contacted at least a few days in advance, and you should expect to receive an audit plan. And you need to go through that audit plan. You want to be very sure that all of the information that the auditor has provided you in the audit plan is accurate, that the address is correct, and all of the various details are all correct. That's all information that the auditor got from us. So if they've got it wrong, chances are we need to fix something on our end. The audit will begin with an opening meeting. This is a good chance for you to confirm any last-minute changes, any visitors that you're going to have, any key people that are going to be out that day, and so forth. And then your stage 1 audit will proceed from the opening meeting according to the auditor's plan. Now, our auditors use a standardized stage 1 workbook. We have one for each of the scopes to record the results of their assessments. Now, just about everything that's looked at within a stage 1 audit, as we saw earlier, just about all of it is documentation based in nature. And the options that the auditor is given on what they're looking at, these things are going to fall into one of two output results. Either the item is going to be marked as conforms, this meets the requirements, or it's going to be flagged as a concern. Now, a concern is going to be anything that is a disconnect between what you're doing and the requirement from the applicable standard. Now, you'll note that these are not nonconformances. We don't issue nonconformances within a stage 1 audit. We're not allowed to by the industry, but we are required to identify for you what are the concerns that are present within your system. Now, once the auditor has reviewed the materials, when the stage 1 audit is complete, typically they're going to need some time to prepare their report. As I mentioned, there are no nonconformances that are issued. And once the report's done, you should expect to be asked to participate in a closing meeting to go over the results. Now, there are 3 possible outcomes of a stage 1 audit. You're going to be recommended for continuance to stage 2 with no concerns. That's the one we want, obviously. You may have a recommendation to continue to stage 2 with some concerns. That's actually the most common result that we have, 1 or 2 items that need some attention. Or if things are really bad, the auditor may recommend a repeating of the stage 1 audit. Now, you will be asked to sign an acknowledgement of the results, and you will be given a copy of the report. Now, if the auditor has travel issues and so forth, it might be a day or 2 before you get the final report, but be assured you absolutely will get it. And you should call PJR within a week if it's been a week and the report has still not been provided. We definitely will follow up on your behalf for that. Now, in terms of things that can go wrong and prevent continuance to a stage 2 audit, there's a few items that are highly concerning. And one of those is an inadequate or inappropriate interaction of processes. If you have an interaction of process document that is a recreation of the PDCA diagram from the standard, if it's something from a consultant that bears no resemblance to what your processes actually are, if you don't have an interaction of processes, the IOP document is the single best indicator that you understand the process approach that's prescribed in ISO 9001. So accordingly, if this is not in place, it casts a lot of concern over the rest of your system. So I know this seems like a simple thing, but it's not so simple. It needs to be in place. Another big item is going to be inadequate process measures or process performance data. Now, ISO 9001 requires that you monitor, measure, and analyze your processes. So our expectation is that every process you've identified, thinking back a few slides, that organization had 6 processes. You need to have a way of measuring the effectiveness of each of those processes. Now, some of the standards that we audit to, for example, IETF 16949, they require that you have a year's worth of that process performance data. Now, for most everything else, including ISO 9001, there is no minimum. You just have to be able to show that there's enough in place that you've measured the process. Now, some organizations, particularly smaller companies, they will have just a few measures of effectiveness, a couple of big picture process measures that kind of cover everything. And that's considered acceptable. That is completely okay. Now, a couple of other items that can come up and be concerning. If your internal audit is inadequate, we are looking for evidence that your internal audits are planned. That's required by ISO 9001. We're looking to see, did you do an effective audit? Did you take audit samples? Do you have auditor notes to share with us? You have to bear in mind, we need to be able to confirm that you've audited your whole system. Non-conformances on their own are not evidence that you've done an internal audit. They're part of the picture, but that's not all of it. Did you write nonconformances during your internal audit? Did you take action to address those nonconformances? Did you ensure that you didn't have auditors auditing their own work? Now, if you have not yet conducted your internal audit at the point that the stage 1 is performed, this is technically okay, but you'll be, if you can show us that you've planned it. First of all, we need to confirm that it's definitely going to take place prior to stage 2. Now that's considered acceptable, as I mentioned. However, if you choose to do that, you are losing a golden opportunity. And that is, as I mentioned, there are no nonconformances in a stage 1 audit. So if we look over your internal audit records and we point out 2, 3 things that need to be fixed, you can fix those things before stage 2 and not have a nonconformance to deal with. It's the one and only time in your certification cycle that you get a free pass, if you will, a free shot, where we tell you this is wrong, you need to fix it, and you don't have to go through the added aggravation of doing a formal corrective action. We also look carefully at internal auditor competency when we do the stage 1 audit. Bear in mind that you as an organization are required to determine competency requirements for everything within your quality system, including the conducting of internal audits. Our auditor is going to want to see proof that your internal auditors met with your competency requirements. Now, again, some standards and industries have additional provisions that need to be met for internal auditor competency. Another item that can be problematic is management review, making sure that the management review meets all of the required inputs and outputs, and that we have evidence of conclusions and actions. You know, sometimes we'll ask for the management review records and we get handed a set of PowerPoint slides. Well, that's good. That's evidence that you've had the meeting. But is it really evidence of decisions and actions, those output items from the ISO 9001 requirement? So bear that in mind. Now, very similar to what we looked at earlier with internal audit, you can choose to schedule your management review after stage 1 and prior to stage 2 and have that be considered acceptable. But again, I caution you, you lose a good opportunity to have the management review minutes looked at in a non-binding context within the stage 1 audit. Again, if we look at it in stage 2 and find issues, now we have to write a nonconformance for it. So bear that in mind. Now, all the conclusions that are reached in a stage 1 audit are going to be subject to review and concurrence by a member of the PJR Executive Committee to make sure that the decision reached was appropriate and fair. Now, our clients are afforded the right to issue a dispute or appeal of an auditor's decision. Now, that is discussed in our procedure Pro 10, which is actually available anytime on the pgr.com website. So if an auditor has concluded that you're not ready for stage 2 and you want to dispute that decision, we do have a process that you can follow for doing so. Now, if the recommendation that you get is to repeat the stage 1 audit, as I mentioned, you will be given a copy of the audit report, and we encourage you to work from that report to shore up any issues that are raised. Now, you are permitted to remain in contact with your auditor and even with the PJR Executive Committee to discuss what you've been doing and to ensure that you're on the right path to a better result. Now, if the recommendation is to proceed, whether it be with or without concerns, we try to encourage our clients to have a minimum of 30 days between stage 1 and stage 2. Obviously, 60 to 75 days is far more preferable. I'll remind you that per the terms of your contract, we do have a 21-day cancellation policy. And I'll also share with you that back-to-back stage 1 and stage 2 audits are almost always problematic. The companies that have those issues, they're not in a position to resolve those issues, and enter the stage 2 audit from a position of strength. And again, we do encourage you to use that time to resolve those concerns that were raised in the stage 1 assessment. We want our clients to feel confident and comfortable with the stage 1 audit, and it's our hope that the care that's taken in the pre-stage 1 phase and the mutual support of your auditor and our team here at PGR headquarters are going to help make the process as seamless as possible. We do wish you every success on your certification journey. I'd like to invite you to tune in for one of my other webinars. We have ISO 9001 2015, Knowing What to Expect to Ensure a Stress-Free Audit. This is an exploration of some fundamental issues that are inherent to ISO 9001 certification. It intends to kind of clear the air on what's expected. We also have a very popular presentation entitled The Interaction of Processes and Its Importance to a Successful Audit. That is an exploration of processes and how to correctly understand them. And we have a lot of other webinars on a variety of topics, including the standards that I've listed here. If you'd like to be kept informed of the latest news automatically, the best way for you to do that is to opt in for automatic updates, and that can be done by visiting our website at www.pgr.com. If you go to the bottom of the page, input your email address in the provided space and click subscribe. You will be opted in for automatic updates on upcoming webinars, news updates, and other points of interest. I do thank you for your time. At this time, I'm going to go ahead and unlock the question portion of the dashboard and see if we have any questions today. Keith Bills asks, I was told that auditors, internal auditors, are now allowed to audit their own work in the 2015 version. Keith, that is not the case. They are permitted to audit areas in which they participate. For example, if you have a line lead auditing a production line where they have oversight responsibility, but no, they cannot audit their own work. Keith Bills also asks, are we allowed to contact our auditor prior to stage 1? What can we discuss? Well, Keith, absolutely. You can establish contact with your auditor once they've been assigned. You can discuss, I would suspect, just about anything. The only thing the auditor cannot do is discuss any kind of consulting with you. They're not permitted to tell you what to do. Kristen Britch asks, can process measures be the same as objectives and KPIs? Yes, absolutely. Those terms can be considered synonymous. Adam Drummond asks, do I need to have a desk audit? Can I do it myself, or do I have to have someone else do it for me? Well, Adam, assuming that you're referring to something along the lines of a pre-assessment or a consulting audit, those things are up to you. The stage 1 audit is absolutely mandatory. You cannot just proceed straight away to stage 2. Sheila Levantine Gagnon, I do hope I'm pronouncing that right. Please confirm a quality manual is not required to be prepared anymore. That is correct. A quality manual is no longer mandatory in ISO 9001. However, you are required to have your scope maintained as documented information. The scope and your exemptions have to be officially documented. It just does not have to be within a quality manual. Adam Drummond also asks, what information needs to be covered to document interested parties? Do ISO clauses need to be documented for all parties? Adam, in terms of interested parties, you're required to have it established who they are. You're required to have a process established for determining what their expectations are and to be reviewing their feedback. You would probably need to speak with a consultant for a more in-depth analysis of the interested party requirement. And Jim Jasinski is asking about the presentation. Yes, this presentation will be available for download shortly after we're finished, and you can rewatch it on our YouTube page. Any other questions today? Okay, we have a couple of follow-up questions. Kristen Bridge, can interested parties just be customers? Technically, yes, that is possible, but you're going to be expected to show that you went through an appropriate analysis before you arrived at that conclusion. You cannot simply jump to that and not be prepared to show an analysis behind that decision. Melanie Champlain asks, is a risk ranking matrix required? No, it is not officially required. In fact, a risk management process is not officially required either. If you're looking for guidance on the risk management activity, as is discussed within section 6.1, again, you may need to speak with a consultant. Any other questions today? Okay, thank you all for your time. Have a great day.